Okay guys, this month's project is the Charming Roll-Up Zippered Pouch. And so you unroll it and you can store your sewing tools, knitting tools, makeup brushes, paint brushes, crayons, markers, anything like that. So let's get started. Okay, so what you're going to need will be your stabilizer, and in the instructions it's calling for medium weight cutaway, but I'm just going to go ahead and use poly mesh. And then you will need Kimberbell tape, your scissors. You're going to need 2 pieces of batting, and it says on that first page how big a piece you need. It depends on which size of pouch that you're making, and then your different colors of thread. And then in your kit, if you purchase one of the kits, it's going to have all 3 of your fabric pieces. It will have the piece of clear vinyl, the lace zipper, and then yours will have your ribbon. We haven't got the ribbon in yet, and so we're using Rick Rack for my ribbon. And then on your USB stick for the files, if you're going to do the smaller pouch, it can be done in the 5x7, and you have 2 stitch files for that one. And then the larger pouch that they're calling the 8x12, it has 2 stitch files also. The first stitch file can be stitched in the 6x10 hoop, but the second one has to be stitched in an 8x12 or larger. So I'm going ahead and I've hooped up my poly mesh. I've hooped up 1 piece in my 6x10 to create that first pocket, and then I've hooped up my second piece of poly mesh in the 8x12 hoop. So if you don't have a 6x10 hoop, you will have to do both of them in the 8x12. If your machine is only a 6x10 sewing area, you will want to do the 5x7 pouch. Don't start in on the 6x10 and then realize that you can't do this larger one. So the 6x10s or smaller will do the 5x7 pouch. So I'm going to be doing the larger one, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up that first pocket. And what it's going to do first is stitch a placement line for the piece of batting. I haven't threaded the machine yet. Okay, while it is stitching that placement line, in your kit you're going to have 2 pieces of I'm going to call the main fabric, or it's fabric 1. The bigger piece is going to be the outside of the bag. So we're going to set that to the side. So what we're working with right now is the smaller piece. So, and they're calling this the zipper pocket lining. This is the zipper pocket lining. So I have threaded up with the color that I want the quilting to be on this piece of fabric. So now I'm going to take that smaller piece of batting, lay it down over that placement line, and then stitch the tack down. Okay, so after it stitches that batting down, then we're going to go in and trim the batting away. Just right up next to the stitching line. Okay, now what it's going to stitch next is the placement line for the fabric, and I know the fabric has to lay on top of the batting, so you know me, I'm going to take a shortcut. So I'm going to forward through that placement line for the fabric, and so now I just need to lay the fabric down, make sure it's covering up the batting all the way around, and it's going to stitch the tack down. so I went ahead and after it stitched the fabric tack down, I stitched the quilting. And then what it says to do in instruction or step 11, page 6, this is the right side of our hoop here, and we're going to mark an R right there with the fabric marker. If you can read my handwriting, that's an R. Okay, and then you can unhoop it, and we're going to go over to the cutting table. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we've unhooped it, and we're just going to trim the stabilizer up next to our fabric all the way around. And then you can save these pieces of stabilizer if you want to stitch them together and make a bigger piece. Then we're going to, says now we're on step 13, and it says to locate the right side of our fabric, which is this one over here that we marked with the R, and then we're just going to take a ruler and we're going to trim just to the outside of that tack down line, so kind of right to the outside of it, so we don't cut our stitches. And so we're just trimming this side of the fabric. The rest of it we're leaving as is. And then we're going to set this zippered pocket to the side. Okay, so we're ready to do the second part of the design. So I've gone ahead and I've pulled that design from the USB stick. And the first piece of fabric we're going to be using is the solid fabric. So you want to thread up with whatever color you want your quilting and all to be on this piece. And so this one was, going to go back, it is fabric to the lining piece. Okay, so what it's going to stitch off first is the placement line for the other piece of batting. Okay, so it's done the placement line, and it's kind of towards the top of the hoop up there, and then you're just going to lay that batting piece down on top of that, and then it will tack it down, and we will trim the batting after it tacks it down. Okay, so after it tacked the batting down, I just went in with my scissors and trimmed it down. The next thing it's going to stitch off is the placement line for the fabric. And next, it's going to do the placement line for the piece of fabric. And I know where that's going to go. So, again, I'm just going to forward through that placement line. And then lay, and then again, this is the fabric number 2, the solid piece. Lay that on top of the batting, and now it's going to stitch the tack down, and then it's going to stitch the quilting on this piece. It finished doing the quilting, and I was just going to show you it's the same design that's on the fabric that's going to be on the outside and the lining of our pocket down there. So it's a cute quilt design. But what it's going to stitch off next are going to be the words, and this is going to be the top of the pouch over here. And I'm going to try stitching the words in white first, and we're going to see how much they show up. I may end up changing to a darker purple thread, so we will see. Okay, yeah, I ended up getting a darker purple thread because the white thread just didn't show up enough for the words. So I'm stitching the words off now, and there is a note in the instructions here on step 6 that if you are doing the 5x7 design, it's the text is 2 lines, but if you're doing the 8x12, it's just a single line of text. So once we get done with the words, we'll come back. Okay, what it's going to stitch next after the words are the little placement lines for the pocket piece. And back in the instructions on page 6, for the prep work for the second part of the design, it said to take the, this is for the small pockets, to take that fabric piece and fold it in half widthwise. So if you're doing the larger bag, that piece is just a square, so it really doesn't matter which direction. So like on this one, since it's the plaid, it doesn't really matter. If it is the stripes, you want the stripes going this direction. So the fold is over here, your stripes are going that way. If you're doing the smaller pouch, it is a rectangle, so you'll just fold it again so that the stripes are going, it says perpendicular with the fold. So now that it's stitched the placement lines, you're going to take the pocket, lay it down, and line up that fold with, you want to cover up barely those placement lines. So just barely cover them up. And then it says, back on page 7, it says to tape exactly the way the picture is showing. So I'm going to do that. So it just doesn't want your foot to hang on this pocket. So I'm actually going to tape a little bit more. So just right over the placement little lines, and then it's going to stitch the tack down. Okay, so after it stitches the tack down, it does say to remove the tape, but do not trim the fabric or anything. And then the next thing it's going to stitch off are the little lines for the pockets. Okay, so we're going to stitch those next. Okay, now for the pockets, what I just stitched was this step number 9 here on the machine. It's step 16 on the instructions. That's the baby, not Bailey. So, okay, on the 5x7 pouch, it only stitched 1 divider. On the 8x12, it stitches 3. For the next step, there's a note, and it says if you want larger pockets, so if you want the pockets to be bigger, don't stitch the next step. But if you want smaller pockets, go ahead and stitch this next step, number 10, on your machine. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch them. Okay, now this is where it's going to start getting interesting, because this is where we're going to start putting it together. So what it's going to stitch next, after it does the 2 pocket sections, is the placement line for the bottom part of the bag, or the lower part of the bag. Okay, so right down here at the bottom is where it stitched the placement line. So what we're going to do first is take the piece of vinyl, and we're going to center the bottom long edge along that piece of vinyl, and then we're going to tape it in place over here on the side. Make sure it stays, mine's moving. Okay, make sure it stays in place. Then we're going to take this is the first piece that we stitched off, the little pocket, and we trimmed it over here on the right side. So we're going to take this pocket, lay it right side down, and the side that we trimmed, that's going to center it over that placement line also. And then we'll tape it in place. And then what it's going to stitch next is the seam line along the bottom here, and that's going to sew all of these pieces together. So you're making a little sandwich. The vinyl is down in here underneath, or in between these two. Just make sure as it's stitching this seam line that it is catching a good, 1/4 inch of this vinyl down here. You don't want it to disappear down in that seam, so make sure it's catching it. Okay, now we're going to go over to the cutting table. Okay, so step 22 of your instructions, you're trimming this excess fabric down here below the pocket. So I've already done that, so you trim that away, okay? And that leaves that seam allowance. And there's a note, be careful not to cut the vinyl or the quilted pocket here. And then now we've got it laying on our cutting table, and what we're going to do is cut a slit right along here in the stabilizer. So we're just going to take our rotary cutter and go right up against that fabric and cut the stabilizer. And it says to extend it about 1/4 inch, so I'm just going to go all the way to the end of the hoop here. Now after we cut that opening in the stabilizer, the next step on step 24, it says to cut the stabilizer 1/4 inch towards the top of the hoop. So we're just going to cut that about 1/4 inch on either side of our fabric here. So over here, and then peel this away over here. Okay. Then what we're going to do, untape it, take the tape off, and we're going to take this quilted fabric, not the vinyl. The vinyl is going to stay up here. We're taking the quilted pocket and we're going to fold it through the opening here. Okay, and then we're going to flip the hoop over to the back side, and we're turning, or kind of pulling this pocket up here and folding it down. Okay, so this is on the back side of the hoop, and then we're going to tape this in place. Tape it. So this, we're seeing the right side of the fabric on the back of the hoop. Tape it good. Okay, then we're going to go turn the hoop back over to the front, and we're going to untape the vinyl that's taped up here on top, and we're going to lay it back down, and we're going to tape it down here at the bottom. This will all make sense in a minute, I promise. Okay, so fold this back down and then tape it in place, and what's going to stitch next is going to be the tack down to hold this piece of vinyl in place. So when you put this on the machine, you are going to have like a gap there from your interfacing. It's okay. It's gonna, because we're going to take care of that here in a minute. So what it's going to do now is just stitch this vinyl down. After it stitches that vinyl piece down, we're going to take the hoop off the machine, and we are now on step 29. And it says to turn the hoop over to the back side, kind of flipping it upside down too. And what we're going to do is just trim this piece of stabilizer away. So we're trimming it away from the inside of the stitching line, and it says be careful, don't cut the vinyl and don't cut the stitches. So I'm doing this very carefully. And we're about to insert the zipper, so I went ahead and I threaded the machine back up with the white thread. And what it's going to stitch next is the placement line for the zipper. Put the hoop back on. Right. So now it's just going to be stitching on the vinyl. Looks like it's not stitching on anything. Now, what we've got to do is trim this vinyl right around this stitching line. And it says to cut the stitching line away. So I'm just going to I'm going to use a ruler here, and I'm going to try to cut just to the outside of that stitching line. And that way, the stitching will be gone. There, cut on both sides. And I off. Again, the outside of that stitching line. Missed a spot right there. Okay, so that's cut out. Okay, so here's the opening that we cut in the vinyl, and you want to take your zipper, you want it to be right side up, so the zipper pull is on the top, or the zipper tape is on the top, and then the zipper pull is to your left. And we want to center that over that opening. So we want to make sure the teeth are in the opening, and your pull and your stop are going to kind of hang off either side of the hoop. So what I'm going to do is kind of tape it down on this side, and then just make sure it stays centered in the opening as we go along to the other side, and then tape it over here, and then turn the hoop over and make sure it's centered in the opening. And then we're going to put this back on the machine, and it's going to stitch the zipper down. After it stitches the zipper in place, then it says to carefully remove all of the tape. So I've done that. And so now we are on page 10, step 35 of your instructions. And what it's saying to do is turn the hoop over, and we're going to untape this pocket here. Save the tape. We'll use it again here in a minute. And then that's just going to flip down, see, over the vinyl. And that becomes the lining of that pocket. This is when it started making sense to me. So now, back on the wrong side of the hoop, flip that down, and then tape it in place. So I'm going to just give it a little tug, and then tape it down here. And then put the hoop back on the machine, and it's going to stitch the tack down here. So it's going to stitch that pocket lining down. Okay. Then it says to remove the tape from the back side. And then what it's going to stitch now is the placement line for the piece of ribbon. So it's just going to stitch a little placement line down here at the bottom. Okay, and we're going to go back to the cutting table because my tape is over there. Okay, so it's stitched the placement line for the ribbon, and it's really hard to see because it's right on top of that tack down and everything. So I've kind of drawn it with the fabric marker. So there's the placement line. You're going to take your piece of ribbon. Again, we're using rickrack. You're going to fold that piece of ribbon in half, and then you're going to lay it on top of that tack down, and you want the fold down here at the bottom, and you want the fold to extend past that placement line. It says about 1/4 of an inch. And then it says to tape it like down here and up above. I'm just going to tape it right across there because now it's going to stitch the tack down. So we're going, okay, and then it's just going to stitch that ribbon down. Okay, and then what we're going to do is remove that piece of tape. And then it says to make sure that your ribbon is kind of tucked inside the bag. So you want to make sure the ends aren't sticking up here anywhere around the outside of the project. So I'm just going to tape it down like that. And then the next step, do not forget. So actually that's where it says to tape it. This one I went ahead and I highlighted, and you should better circle it or highlight it or something. Open the zipper. It says 3/4 of the way. So I'm going to open up my zipper underneath the ribbon there. Okay, so about 3/4 of the way. Then I've got the ribbon taped out of the way. We're going to take that final piece, which is the outside piece, and we're going to lay it. Does this have a right or a wrong? I don't think it matters. We're going to lay that down, covering up the whole project. Make sure you're covering up all the fabric. Make sure your zipper is open, the ribbon is tucked out of the way, and then the final stitch out is the tack down of everything. Okay, so it's done stitching all the way around. We're going to unhoop it, and then we're going to trim everything down to about 1/4 inch away from that stitching line. The opening is up here at the top. Okay, now we're just going to clip our corners. Okay, now I've clipped my corners, and now we're just going to turn it right side out, poke the corners out, and then I'm going to press it, but I'm not going to press that vinyl. Make sure like you press it from the, outside of the bag so you don't touch the iron to that vinyl. And this one turns pretty easy, so we're filming it. Okay, I'm going to poke out my corners and press it, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I got it finished, and I turned it, pressed it real good, used a press cloth while I was pressing over here around the vinyl and all. And then this was the end that was open, and so in the instructions it just says to whip stitch it shut, or I just used a piece of steam-a-seam and put up in there and pressed it. And then I just filled it with our little sewing tools, and the pocket over here is a good place for your quilt clips or anything like that. And then you just roll it up and tie the little piece of ribbon around it, and then you're good to go. And then when you get there, you just unroll it, and you have all your tools ready to go. Pretty cute.